We've already had a look at magic users in the Dresden Files RPG in the form of the focused practitioner and the minor talents, neither of which come close to this sheer level of power. Today we're going to be talking about the Sorcerer, the second most powerful spellcaster you can possibly play, as well as one of the more interesting choices to go with. Technically, at mid-level as far as refresh costs go. In practice, it tends to be a lot higher, and we will get to that. In the meantime, what is a sorcerer as far as Dresden Files lore? Well, if we're looking at just the novels, there's no real good definition given. The closest thing I can find is that a sorcerer is not a member of the White Council of Wizardry, whereas a wizard is, which is where the name wizard comes from. They're on the White Council of Wizards. The sorcerer is not. Now, most of the sorcerers that we've seen in the novels have been villains. Specific examples would include, Victor Sells in the first book, Stormfront, or, what's her name? Hannah Asher in Skin Game. Sorcerers. Technically, Elaine Mallory, who appears, or at least comes up quite a few times, is also a sorcerer, as she is not a member of the White Council of Wizards, though her power level apparently could easily match any wizard. So, mechanically speaking, in the Dresden Files role-playing game, what's the difference between a sorcerer and a wizard? Well, for starters, sorcerers have a smaller list of musts, or required powers, than wizards do, though they do tend to share a similar suite. Secondly, if your sorcerer chooses to take the refinement supernatural ability for magic, you can only take that once for any given upgrade. For instance, you could only take Discipline of Fire refinement once. Whereas with wizards, you can do that as many times as you like, as long as you have the refresh to cover it. So this really says that in the game, wizards are meant to be more powerful than sorcerers, at least in the long run. At relatively lower levels of play, you're not going to notice as much. Higher levels, yes, you will. Before we get to my personal thoughts and feelings on the sorcerer, let's go over what you need to play one. Technically speaking, you only need 2 supernatural powers to play the sorcerer. Evocation and Thaumaturgy, both of which weigh in at 3 refresh. So if you want to play a sorcerer, you're going to be spending at least 6, meaning that you cannot play one at the lowest recommended level of play. You'd need to go at least 1 higher, and even then you can't customize it. If you really want to start customizing your sorcerer, your GM needs to create a game for at least 8 points of refresh. That's 6 to spend on Evocation and Thaumaturgy, and 1 to spend on something else of your choice. Keeping in mind that in the Dresden Files RPG, you need at least 1 point of refresh left at character creation. The last must that you have to take is a high concept, as always, that ties into what you are. For the sorcerer, these examples. I do speak English, I promise. The example high concepts are Sorcerer Cop and Spell Slinging Troubadour. Okay, so now we go into optional stuff you can take. I mentioned refinement earlier, but only once per thing. And this will make more sense much later on when I cover spellcasting, though that will not be for some time, so don't hold out for it. Other options include the Sight, and in fact, at 1 point of refresh, if you have the opportunity to take the Sight, I really recommend you do. Without it, you won't be able to interact with the supernatural as much, and it's going to be much harder for you. Secondly, it brings up the Lawbreaker supernatural powers. I don't know how I feel about that. Lawbreaker is a supernatural power that you take that doesn't have a strict advantage. It just says that in the past you've broken a law of magic and one way or another got away with it. Let's see here. Your important skills are going to be conviction, discipline, and lore. And that should be about it. Like I said, minimum refresh of 6. In practice, higher than 6. You're going to want at least 7. The sight is important, I promise. Okay, so as for my personal thoughts on the Sorcerer, this one is kind of weak in my opinion, and not weak mechanically, but one of my least favorites. They don't include a whole lot of lore or ideas about sorcerers, mainly because the community of fans about the Dresden Files doesn't know much about them. Like, they're just wizards that aren't on the White Council, as far as we know. Most of them are bad, at least the ones that we've seen. The book speculates on this, that being the RPG book Your Story, speculates, but doesn't give a definitive answer. So, it's hit or miss, really. Now, there is an advantage to that, and that's that your GM and you can work together to create something way, way, way more interesting than is presented in the book. That's all for today. Thank you very much for watching. The next time you see me, we'll be talking about the True Believer template. Have a fantastic rest of your evening.